The white marble architecture of the sanctum fractured with a sound like a dying god. Massive blocks of reinforced composite material, polished to a mirror shine to reflect the fragile vanity of the upper elites, fell like meteors into the churning white fog below. The primary transmitter crystal, now a jagged monument of unstable, bleeding crimson energy, groaned as its internal lattice structures warped under the immense thermal pressure. Every few seconds, a localized electromagnetic pulse rippled outward from the dying core, turning the air into a shimmering web of purple and gold static that violently dissolved any remaining security drones into heaps of melted plastic and weeping solder. Mara ran blindly through the narrow auxiliary maintenance conduit, her heavy industrial prosthetic arm locked securely around Silas's chest. The scavenger's body was terrifyingly limp, his head lolling against her shoulder as dark, thick blood continued to drip from his nose and the corners of his tightly closed eyes. He was burning hot to the touch, not with the standard fever of an organic sickness, but with the volatile, raw current of the Tartarian ley lines that was still bouncing chaotically through his rewired nervous system. Every few paces, faint golden geometric lines would flare up beneath his skin, tracing the intricate paths of his veins before submerging back into the flesh like subterranean fire. Behind them, Lork brought up the rear, his massive bronzandian frame clattering heavily against the corrugated steel floorboards of the escape pipe. The mechanical leader's left shoulder was completely bare, the protective plating sheared off by a kinetic halberd during their desperate stand against the Seraphim. White hydraulic fluid leaked rhythmically from his exposed pistons, leaving a stark, pale trail in the dust, but his 3 vertical amber lenses remained hyper-focused on the shaking ceiling above them. The structural integrity of the 4th sector distribution loop is down to less than 12%, Lork bellowed through his heavily glitched vocal synthesizer, the mechanical voice dropping into a deep, vibrating bass tone that rattled the walls of the conduit. Mara, if we do not clear the secondary pressure valve within 40 meters, the vertical thermal runaway from the core will catch us. It will cook the organic tissue right off your bones. I'm moving as fast as the servos will push me, Mara shouted back, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps that fouled the interior of her respirator mask with thick condensation. She swung her mechanical arm forward, using her synthetic fist to violently dent a protruding electrical junction box out of their path. The automated maintenance lift at the end of this run connects directly to the subflooring of the mid-sector residential grid. If Silas's wireless virus held, the local security gates should still be cycling blindly. As they sprinted deeper into the narrow metal throat of the machine, Silas's mind was entirely detached from the physical agony of the escape. He was drowning in an ocean of unlinked memory. The viral script he had forced into the Prime Matrix hadn't just shattered the timeline purge. It had broken the dam that kept his own consciousness categorized and contained. The clinical, artificial reality of the corporate network was peeling away like burnt paper, revealing a chaotic, swirling vortex of images, sounds, and sensations that didn't belong to the life of a 7th sector scavenger. In the blinding, golden static of his lucid coma, Silas felt himself floating through the fractured ruins of an entirely different existence. He didn't see the neon-choked vertical slums or the dripping chemical pipes of his youth. Instead, his mind reconstructed the heavy, reassuring scent of real earth, the cold touch of solid red clay, and the distinct, geometric lines of old brick buildings. He saw a flashing, spectral illusion of an old structure, the weathered facade of Keene Elementary in a place called Wooster, Ohio. He could hear the faint, echoing sound of children's laughter, a pure, unnetworked sound that felt completely impossible within the sterile parameters of the city he knew. The Matrix had tried to categorize this memory as a structural anomaly, a piece of unlinked junk data to be scrubbed from the system timeline, but it was too deeply rooted into the foundation of his soul. The dream shifted violently, the golden lines of code twisting into the shape of massive, turning industrial rollers and the heavy, rhythmic thrum of manufacturing machinery. He could taste the sharp, distinct flavors of a food service line, the smell of grease and flour, and the physical exhaustion of a double shift spent working with his hands to survive. These weren't corporate-issued memories. They were the raw, unrefined data of a life lived outside the simulation. Suddenly, a new geometric blueprint expanded within his mind's eye, not the layout of a corporate security hub, but a detailed three-dimensional framework for a business called Manifest Greatness Laundromat. He could see the spinning brass drums of the machines, the lines of copper plumbing, and an introductory paragraph written in a clean, bold script that identified his core signature not as Silas the Scavenger, but as Cody Blake Huffman. "Hold the line," a voice echoed through the golden void, a voice that felt remarkably like his own, but stripped of the fear and hesitation that had defined his life in the slums. "The code cannot delete what it did not create. You are the architect of the era." With a sharp, agonizing gasp that sounded like a drowning man breaking the surface of the water, Silas's eyes snapped open in the physical world. The transition was a physical blow. He was no longer floating in the infinite blue ocean of the Matrix. He was lying flat on his back on a cold, grease-stained concrete floor inside a cramped, dimly lit mechanical staging room. The air was thick with the overwhelming, artificial scent of synthetic lavender, indicating they had successfully crossed the boundary into the lower layers of the mid-sector residential grid. The deafening roar of the collapsing sanctum had faded into a low, rhythmic vibration that thrummed through the heavy iron pipes running along the ceiling. "Silas, stay down, don't try to move your neck." Mara's voice was sharp, filled with a frantic panic as she leaned over him. She had removed her heavy canvas satchel, scattering dozens of scavenged copper wires, circuit boards, and manual soldering tools across the floor around his head. Her mechanical eye was spinning in rapid, erratic circles, projecting a soft blue diagnostic grid onto his chest to monitor his erratic heart rate. She held a crude, manual neural dampener, a device made from a modified security drone core and strips of raw industrial rubber, against his left temple, trying to cool down the electrical static that was still visible beneath his skin. "The loop, did it hold?" Silas managed to choke out, his voice incredibly dry, sounding like gravel scraping against iron. He tried to raise his right hand, but his muscles were completely unresponsive, locked in a state of severe neural exhaustion. "The purge is dead, kid," Lork's deep voice rumbled from the far corner of the room. The massive mechanical leader was perched near a heavy, reinforced steel security door, using his remaining functional arm to manually weld the lock mechanism shut with a small pocket thermal torch. "The seventh sector is still dark, but the network's psychic signal never fired. The wire is completely silent down there. You didn't just glitch the system, you broke its jaw. The corporate enforcers are in a state of total structural panic." "But you nearly destroyed yourself doing it," Mara said, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the frequency on the manual dampener. A sharp, high-pitched whine echoed from the device as it forced the residual Tartarian voltage out of Silas's temporal lobe. "Your neural pathways are completely altered, Silas. Look at your reflection in the plating." Silas slowly turned his head to the side, his gaze catching the polished chrome surface of a discarded structural strut nearby. The boy who looked back at him was barely recognizable. The dull, tired eyes of the seventh sector scavenger were gone. His irises had been permanently rewired by the Tartarian data load, transformed into intricate, glowing rings of pale gold that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic intelligence. Whenever he focused his sight on the walls of the room, he could see the faint, glowing blue vectors of the building's wireless network tracing through the concrete, the electrical current flowing through the hidden conduits, and the specific data frequencies of the corporate monitoring systems outside their door. He didn't need a terminal anymore. His brain was actively parsing the environment as a live, interactive map. "The system, it knows my name," Silas whispered, his golden eyes locking onto Mara with a look of profound, quiet intensity. "When I was inside the core simulation, when the Matrix tried to execute the cauterization script, it didn't use my sector registry number. It called me Cody Blake Huffman." Mara froze, her mechanical eye locking into a tight, narrow focus as she stared down at him. The silence inside the small staging room grew incredibly heavy, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of Lork's welding torch. "Cody," Mara murmured, testing the weight of the syllables on her tongue as if she were analyzing an ancient piece of unencrypted code. That's not a sector designation, Sealers. The corporate networks don't issue names like that to the children of the slums. They use numeric strings and network logs, a full three-part linguistic signature. That's an archival administrative designation. It means your core identity was written into the system before the sectors were even constructed. It means he's the anomaly the old king was looking for, Lork stated, turning away from the welded door as his thermal torch clattered against his bronze hip. He walked over to the edge of the platform, his 3 amber lenses staring down at Sealers with a look of genuine, mechanical reverence. The historical fragments left in the sub-7th databanks always spoke of a prime architect, a mind that possessed the unique geometric understanding required to align the Tartarian ley lines with the modern machine. The corporate directors thought they had scrubbed that signature from the root directory 5 centuries ago during the Great Alignment. They thought they had turned you into a compliant ghost. They didn't turn me into anything, Sealers said, his fingers finally twitching as his motor controls began to slowly recover from the dampening process. He forced himself into a sitting position, leaning his back against a thick, vibrating water pipe. They buried me in the dirt and expected me to die like the rest of the junk, but the junk remembers how to fight. He reached out, his hand locking onto the tarnished surface of the cylindrical data capsule that lay on the concrete beside his leg. The metal cylinder was cold now, its golden geometric lines completely dark, but he could feel a faint, structural resonance deep inside the housing, a hidden partition that hadn't been fully unlocked yet. "Where is the king?" Sealers asked, his eyes tracking the blue network lines that were currently pulsing with an irregular, chaotic rhythm through the ceiling panels. "He went up," Mara said, her voice dropping into a tight, worried whisper as she packed her tools back into the canvas satchel. When the sanctum started to cave in, he used the primary orbital lift shafts to climb straight into the high spires. He's hunting the Supreme Commander and the Board of Directors while the local grid is still blind from your virus. He told us to hide in the middle layers until the static clears, but the static isn't clearing, Sealers. Look at the secondary node updates." She pulled her handheld data receiver from her belt, holding the glass screen out so Sealers could see the live stream of corporate military chatter. The screen was no longer flashing with the volatile purple glare of the timeline purge, but it was filled with a dense, cascading wall of red text blocks, emergency mobilization orders, martial law declarations, and tactical coordinate assignments that were being broadcast across every middle and upper tier of the city. "The Supreme Commander survived the collapse," Sealers noted, his golden eyes effortlessly scanning the encrypted red code blocks on the small screen, translating the military jargon into a clean, transparent layout within his mind. He's running a diagnostic scan on the primary matrix from a backup command bunker inside the upper spires. He knows the purge script failed, and he knows exactly why it failed. Sealers pointed his finger at a specific, rotating line of red text near the bottom of the display. "They aren't hunting for an unlinked rebel army anymore, Mara. They've initialized a sector-wide, high-priority sweep protocol called Operation Root Clean. They have deployed the archivists." Lork's mechanical lung bellows suddenly stopped, their rhythmic wheezing dropping into an absolute dead silence. The towering leader stepped back toward the welded door, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his dented pneumatic hammer. "The archivists," the leader rumbled, his vocal synthesizer trembling with a rare note of genuine mechanical dread. "They are not standard soldiers, Sealers. They are the primary matrix's physical immune system. They do not use standard weapons or kinetic rifles. They carry localized data deletion arrays, weapons that don't just kill the flesh, but completely unravel the target's digital and genetic signature from the local environment. If an archivist touches you, it's as if you never existed at all." "They're already in the pipes," Sealers said, his voice flat and steady as he pushed himself completely off the floor, standing upright on his own 2 feet for the first time since the core explosion. The physical weakness in his limbs was gone, replaced by a strange, cold efficiency that felt entirely natural. He could feel the proximity of the hunters through the wireless network lines running beneath the concrete floorboards. He could see their digital signatures, 3 distinct, absolute voids of pure black data that were currently moving through the auxiliary service tunnels just 2 levels below their current position. They weren't searching blindly. They were tracking the specific, unique electromagnetic trail that his rewired brain was radiating into the local grid. "We can't stay in this safe house," Sealers stated, turning toward a narrow ventilation shaft embedded in the rear wall of the staging room. "The midsector isn't a refuge, it's a trap with clean paint. Every monitoring sensor, every automated transit gate, and every automated cleaning drone in these layers is a lens for the primary matrix. If we try to run through the thoroughfares, they'll have the entire sector quarantined before we cross 3 blocks." "Then where do we go?" Mara asked, hoisting her canvas satchel and checking the power levels on her prosthetic arm. "The sluice gate below us is flooded with superheated geothermal steam from the core failure. We can't go back down to the sub-7th abyss." "We go sideways," Sealers said, his golden irises flaring as he stepped up to the ventilation shaft. He reached out with his organic hand, his fingers tracing the edge of the iron louvers. Instead of using force, he simply allowed a small, controlled pulse of his internal Tartarian current to leak from his fingertips into the electronic latch mechanism hidden behind the frame. With a soft, mechanical click, the heavy vent cover swung open smoothly, revealing a dark, horizontal passage that cut through the structural concrete of the residential sector. "This line connects to the Central Environmental Management Facility for the middle tier," Sealers explained, the geometric map of the city shifting and updating within his mind with absolute precision. "It's a fully automated system that regulates the synthetic air and water filtration for the middle-class housing units. The corporate network doesn't keep human enforcers down there because the noise levels from the massive air scrubbers will rupture an unshielded eardrum. But for us, it's a blind spot." "And the archivists?" Locke asked, his heavy boots clattering as he approached the vent opening, his broad shoulders barely fitting within the geometric parameters of the shaft. "They are tracking your signature, kid. If they follow that trail into the filtration facility, they will corner us against the massive intake turbines." "Let them follow it," Sealers said, a cold, dangerous smile touching his lips as he looked down at the tarnished data capsule in his hand. "I'm going to give them a target they can't calculate." Without another word, the scavenger slid into the dark opening of the ventilation shaft, his form immediately swallowed by the shadows of the middle tier. Mara followed instantly, her mechanical prosthetic arm providing a silent, steady anchor as she disappeared into the passage, while Locke came last, using his massive iron frame to pull the heavy vent cover back into its locked position behind them, leaving the welded staging room completely silent and dark. Meanwhile, 2,000 feet above the crumbling ruins of the sanctum, the primary orbital lift car climbed through the absolute vertical darkness of the high spire shafts with a terrifying, smooth velocity. Inside the luxurious, white and gold carpeted interior of the private elevator, the Supreme Commander stood with his back to the glass observation wall, his white-gloved hands clasped tightly behind his waist. His left eye replacement clicked furiously, projecting an endless series of diagnostic reports and code verification logs into the air in front of him. The data was disastrous. The failure of the timeline purge had created a massive, cascading synchronization error that was currently bleeding through 30 different sectors of the middle-class grid, turning the once perfect digital alignment of the city into a chaotic mess of static and unlinked frequencies. "Commander," a cold, aristocratic voice chimed from the communications array embedded in the elevator console. It was the voice of the primary director, the head of the corporate board that governed the high spires. "The primary matrix is reporting a localized root directory intrusion. The administrative signature of Cody Blake Huffman has been verified on the lower levels. This is a critical security breach. The alignment protocol cannot be completed while that signature remains active within the system timeline. The archivists have already been deployed to the Mid-Sector Transition Hub, Director," the commander stated, his voice tight, stripped of its usual mocking amusement. "They are tracking the anomaly's unique electromagnetic signature. The erasure script will be executed within 7 minutes. The lower dirt will be cleansed, and the equation will be balanced." "See that it is," the director responded, the communication line terminating with a sharp, digital click that left the elevator compartment in absolute silence. The commander turned his gaze toward the glass observation wall, looking down at the massive, sprawling landscape of the city below. The lower sectors were completely dark, a vast, pitch-black sea of silent iron and concrete, but the middle residential tiers were alive with a frantic, erratic pulse of red security lights. The infection of independent thought was spreading upward, driven by the viral echo that the scavenger had injected into the core. Suddenly, a violent, metallic shudder tore through the orbital lift car, making the heavy steel cables above them groan in structural agony. The smooth, luxurious illumination panels inside the elevator instantly shifted from clean white to a volatile, deep crimson. The high-speed ascent of the car stopped with a jarring, brutal suddenness, throwing the commander against the gold-trimmed console as the internal gravity stabilizers struggled to recalibrate against a massive, external kinetic load. The commander scrambled to his feet, his cybernetic monocle spinning wildly as he locked his sight onto the thick, reinforced steel ceiling of the lift car. Through the reflective metal panels, a low, singing whistle echoed, the distinct, unmistakable sound of ancient glass cutting through the high-frequency air. A fraction of a second later, the tip of a midnight black greatsword punched cleanly through the 3-inch titanium roof plate, its central crystallized artery flaring with a brilliant, blood-red light that cast long, predatory shadows across the white walls of the compartment. With a single, horizontal wrenching motion of immense, immortal strength, the Eclipse blade tore through the ceiling like paper, ripping the metal roof completely off the car to reveal the absolute, wind-whipped darkness of the vertical elevator shaft. Standing on the narrow steel crossbeams above the suspended car, his long, tattered black cloak whipping violently in the high-velocity updraft, was the Vampire King. His pale face was completely flecked with the silver blood of the seraphim he had slaughtered below, and his crimson eyes burned with a terrifying, ancient fury that made the commander's mechanical monocle freeze in its tracks. "Your elevator is going down, Commander," the vampire declared, his thundering baritone voice easily overwhelming the roar of the wind inside the shaft. He raised the Eclipse blade with both hands, the red light of the sword expanding into a wide, crescent arc of pure electromagnetic destruction as he prepared to sever the primary suspension cables. "The king has returned to the counting house, and your time is officially up." Deep within the dark, clattering corridors of the environmental management facility, Sealers froze in mid-stride, his golden irises pulsing with a sudden, violent surge of static electricity as he felt the distant kinetic impact of the vampire's strike echo through the city's wireless nervous system. The war for the Spires had officially begun, and the timeline was fracturing with every breath they took.